here we are on a lovely sunny day in Lancashire, and I'm not from Lancashire, I'm from Yorkshire actually, but I feel that Lancashire's my home now. I've been over here so many years, but my early life in Yorkshire was just, some of it was lovely. I lived in East Yorkshire, very rural, so I had one of those childhoods in the 60s where you could wander out your back door with a bottle of water and a sandwich in a bag, and you could disappear for the day. Go on the farmer's fields and pick potatoes and peas and things. But where we lived, it was quite a small area between Hull and Beverley, little village sort of thing. And I remember there was a little lady who, she'd had a stroke, and her name was Mrs. McIntyre. And she used to sit on the wall outside in the sun when it was a lovely day, because the stroke had robbed her of her speech. And I think I was probably about 6 years old, maybe 7. And I used to wander past her on my trike because I was always off for the day. And I think she sat there, she's on her own. She didn't have any family, she didn't have a husband or children or anything. And the other kids used to ridicule her. They'd be going, nee, 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 you know, because she couldn't talk. So in the end I thought, well, I'm not having that, that's not right. You know, she must be very lonely, and she probably wants to talk to me. I don't know why she would, but anyway, every day I used to go and sit on the wall with her and I'd talk away about them. And we're doing this today, and we did this at school, and you know, over there in that farmer's field, and so and so, oh, we went chudding for apples, oh, they did give me stomachache because I ate that many. And I think I always had that idea that if somebody's an outsider, it's not right, you've got to draw them in. And I probably felt like that because I felt the outsider in my own family in a way, which was a bit odd. Maybe it was because my mum was from Southern Ireland, and she always said to me when I was little, don't tell anybody I'm Irish. You know, as soon as she opened her mouth, you could tell where she was from. But it was because those were the days when you couldn't be different, you couldn't be the outsider. We'd be given this horrible time, really. So my elder brother used to parent me because my mother was always ill. She had a lot of the genetic conditions. She died at 69 of a heart attack, which is all the stuff that I've got now, really. But she was always good to people. She worked in a boys' remand home, as they were called then, and they all loved her. She'd be coming home from work and I'd cycle up to meet her, and all the kids would be running down the drive saying, Mrs. Adamson, Peggy, wait for me, because they loved her that much, you know, and she used to knit jumpers for them. And I used to think, that's the way to be, isn't it? It's like sharing, isn't it? But the rest of my family, I suppose, were a bit more conservative, a bit different, really. So I suppose I was always a bit rebel, wanted to be off on the bike and doing things and sharing things. And although I could be quite quiet and a little bit perhaps anxious or lacking in confidence, if I saw something going wrong, I'd be in there like this little Yorkshire Terrier snapping at your feet, you know, saying, no, stop that. And I remember watching a child getting beaten up. It was a girl who must have been about 7 years older than me. These lads were beating her up, and I remember wading in, picking up this huge branch, and I waded in and I whacked them all. And they all turned around and said, she's a nutter, she is. And maybe I am, because I just wanted things to be, you know, well, you have no right to do that. But it was really good in some ways, you know. I had freedom, I could do what I wanted. I had family around me that loved me. Our next door neighbour, she was called Mrs. Maguire as well. There seemed to be a lot of mucks around where we lived. And she was a school teacher. And because my mum worked at this boys' home, quite often I'd get home and maybe she wasn't there. And the woman next door, Mrs. Mac, we called, she'd say, well, would you like to come in for a glass of milk, Rosemary? And I'd say, oh yes please, Mrs. Mac. And she'd tell me all kinds of things that I loved about books and history and geography, but also about poverty and people in the world that, you know, they were without things. And I used to think, well, why is that? That's just not right, is it really? And she encouraged me in my writing and my painting. And because I always had a heart condition and chronic brittle asthma, I used to spend 3 weeks at home in bed and maybe 2 weeks in school. And the week so I was at home in bed, I'd be reading voraciously all these books. But she used to bring me lots of books, and she said to me one day, enter a competition. And it was a school teacher's national magazine, and I won this competition, this poetry competition, because of her help. And I just thought, if you encourage somebody, gosh, look what comes of it, you know. And then she said, she talked to me about slavery, because where I lived in East Yorkshire, there were no people who were not white, Catholic, kind of almost low middle class, really, you know. We had 2 cars, a motorbike, a telephone, and it was really interesting to hear about slavery and what people suffered in the world. I was thinking, well, that's not right. It got me a bit angry, really, and I was thinking, well, what can I do about it? And Mrs. Mack said to me, there's a national competition to do with Cadburys, who are Quakers. And she said, I want you to go into this competition. And what you need to do is you need to write a story, and you need to do a painting. She said, I'm not going to tell you what to do or how to do it, but I just want you to do it, and then I will send it off. And it goes off to Birmingham, where Cadburys were, where they had the big place. And I did that, and I remember painting this picture of this African young man, beautiful black young man with his vest full of holes and sweat coming off his face, and he was chopping the sugar cane. And I remember writing a story about him, what his name was, and about how hard he worked trying to get the food on his table for his family. And I won this competition, I couldn't believe it. And it was like, it was a year's worth of chocolate, which was obviously not very good for a child. But it was amazing, it was just wonderful, you know. And it wasn't really the winning the chocolate that was great for me. The thing was, I thought, people are going to read that story. People are going to know about that man. You know? And one of the people, aside from my darling mum, my mum was sweet, she was so caring and just had a heart of gold. She was like a little Irish pepper pot. She was small and round, but she loved everybody. You know, and she used to say, there's no bad children, there's only bad parents. You know, and it's right, really, it is true, you know, it's about that nurturing and that loving. And so I always made sure that if there was a child on their own in our school playground who looked like they didn't fit in, you know, I remember one girl, she was a family that had nothing, so they used to get the welfare that bought their school shoes for them and the school jumper once a year. But she had no handkerchief, so she used to go around doing that on her sleeve, but she felt so embarrassed that she used to do that. And I remember I always carried an extra hanky and used to say, oh, I don't need this, oh, you have it, you know. Because I didn't want her to feel embarrassed or belittled or any of those sort of things, really. But I mean, if you asked the rest of my family about me, they'd say probably I was a pain in the bum, or I was mischievous. And I wasn't really. I mean, my brother will admit, well, you weren't a bad child, you were just a handful, because I'd disappear. I'd go off on my bike, you know, I'd go looking for somebody that I thought needed my help for the day, you know. And in those days, you could wander anywhere. I remember knocking on farmers' doors and saying, oh, I'm really sorry, can I have a drink of water, please? You know, and you could get a drink of water, and usually you'd end up with a butter or an apple or something like that, you know. But, yeah, I mean, there were quite magical times, really, but because my mum was an outsider and she couldn't see her family, you know, a lot of her family was still in Ireland, a lot of them were in Liverpool, but we just didn't get together with her side of the family. I used to think, it seems to be a man's world, it seems to be a world where if you've got power and voice, you can do and control anything. And I think those were the early bits of me that thought, I want to be whatever being equality or humanist minded is. I couldn't have put a label on it then, but I knew what it was. And one of my closest friends at school was a Quaker girl. They never said a lot about the religion, they didn't make a big song and dance about it, but she was always sharing. If you were hungry, you could always go around to their house and they'd feed you, you know. If you needed anything, her family would sort it out for anybody, you know. And I used to think that's such a great thing. And she actually saved me from drowning. Went to the big swimming pool in the centre of Hull with my siblings, and I think they were all up the other end, and because they were a lot older than me, they could swim. And I saw my brother jumping in, and I thought, oh, that's what you must do. So I jumped in, but I couldn't swim. And then she saw me, Lucy saw me, and she could swim, so she saved me. So I think it's down to Quakers that I'm still here today, really. It's one of those curious things of life where it's almost like there's no such thing as coincidence. You know, things are meant to be, aren't they? So I was friends with a Quaker. My mother was Irish Catholic. I didn't really know any Quakers, didn't know what it was about. I won the thing from Cadbury's, Quakers. You know, ended up a Quaker because I just felt it's the most open-minded, equality-minded faith. It's not about religion, it's about a faith, and just seeing that of good in everyone, if you can. I worked as a court-appointed therapist, skipping a lot of years now, probably about 15 years ago, for a psychology service. So I used to work with a lot with offenders who'd maybe done terrible, terrible things. So the judge would ask somebody to write a psychological report. So I used to get paid to do that. I'd meet them, I'd talk to them, assess them, write a report. And then sometimes I would get paid by social services or whoever, the court, to have therapy with that person to try and bring them round. And I always used to think, it's not a bad person. They've done a bad act, but there's always room for change. There's always room for that kind of turning your life around and just seeing that little glimpse, what the Quakers call, you know, seeing the light. You know, there's the light in there somewhere. And out of the wages I used to get, which was tremendous years ago, I used to make sure that everything that I earned, actually, I used to pass off as something else. I remember one guy had lost his kids because they said he'd abused his kids. Not sexually, it was neglect. But he'd been brought up and he didn't have to parent. So what I did was I spent all the stuff I had on things round, and then I'd say, well, we'll do things like play therapy, or do you know how to do this and do that? And then let him take them home. So it's my way of actually, I was setting his family up with stuff, really. And I don't think that doesn't make me any better than anybody else or any saint or somebody wonderful. It's just, if you've got the insight, if you can see something and you know it needs some help, or you know you've got something that you can put in that cooking pot to make it a better dish, you'll do it, won't you? Why would you not? You know, if you've got something extra and you can see somebody down the road that's not got something, why would you not share that extra thing? And I suppose because I went to a special school when I was a little girl because of my heart problems and breathing problems and all that, people used to think, oh, special school, you're all mentally retarded, and I hate words like that. But most of us are what were called then delicate children, so we all had heart conditions, lung conditions. Some of them had cerebral palsy or whatever. And it was great. I mean, we had a great fun time. It was an open air school, which I think they closed down in the 1970s or 80s. But they used to put you to bed in an afternoon to have a sleep, and they tried to build you up a bit. But it was a great place to be, because actually it was so far left socialist thinking, all the teachers and the way it was set up, you know. And we did a lot of sharing of stuff. You know, we used to have days where they would find out, oh, when Abba Van was on, we all donated something, and then we said that actually we'd go the extra mile and set up a stall and sell something. And most of us were so poorly or short of breath, actually, you know, we didn't have much energy to do it. But by golly, when we saw what happened over there, you know, we wanted to do it, so we did it. And I was really pleased about that. You know, it's one of the things that I'm proud about, that we didn't just watch it on telly. You know, it meant something to think that other children out there who were like us, probably, and then died under a slag heap because somebody was making lots of money out of piling slag from a coal mine and not paying somebody enough and that actually there was that great tragedy. And even then, although I think I was 10 or 11 then, I knew about what the bosses earned and what the workers earned. And again, I think that kind of set me outside a bit really. It probably made me a bit, I don't know, maybe a bit, I always had an answer. My mother used to say, you know, somebody said of me once, she's always got an answer, or she'll answer you back, you know, and it was considered a bad thing. But actually, I don't think it's a bad thing. To answer back is to say, well, tell me why. It's that social psychology or sociological thing of saying, who's saying it, why are they saying it, what are they saying it for, you know. And I learned that early on, probably I was 14, and learned about the media and the newspapers, you know, or who belonged to who, and why they were saying it, you know. Which was really odd, because my family was so contained, and they never talked politics in our house. Not at all. You know, they weren't that kind of family. I think my mum was so frightened of what went on in Ireland and people not liking the Irish or outsiders. And my father, he was like a Victorian dad really. What he said, he kind of laid down the rules really. So yeah, politics weren't at home, but for me, politics were always part of my life, my body really, about, you know, if there's something going on, I want to go out there and help a bit. And I used to think, I'm a bit useless actually, because I'm rubbish at maths, and everybody seemed to value maths in our family, because my dad was an industrial chemist. But for me it was all about, if you can listen and really care about somebody that you're listening to, that's the greatest gift you can give them. I was one of these girls that was brought up in, like I say, East Yorkshire, very, very, I don't know, stage really. So if you were to leave home, you had to get married, otherwise you stayed at home. So I got married early on, had 2 children, moved over here to Lancashire, but I'd already been campaigning before that on various things, and I think part of that was going to a special school made me think you shouldn't have to be excluded from a shop if you're a wheelchair user. So as soon as I moved over here and my sons went to school, I joined various groups really about disability rights. I was part of the disability rights group in Manchester, but also there's a national one. And then that marriage ended sadly, and out of respect, we'll talk a great deal about that. But then Chris and I got together, my wife and I got together, we met, and it was just wonderful really. It was like meeting your soulmate really, because we have the same values, got the same daft sense of humour, but also feel passionately about helping others and wanting to do things. We do things in a different way. Chris is very, very quiet and shy really. So I guess I'm the mouthpiece of the 2 of us, but I definitely couldn't do what I do without my Chris. So then I started working, I worked for a psychology service, loved the work, really liked helping patients. I mean, there's some really poorly people out there, and I hate the fact that there's still that social stigma about mental health of any kind. And it's as disabling as being someone with 1 lung or asthmatic or whatever, you know, but yet it's treated as a stigma and something to be ashamed of, or, you know, a weakness. And it's not. It just means that, you know, the brain is a part of the body as much as your intestines or your bowel or your stomach is. And if they go wrong, what do? You try and alleviate it by finding the right either medication or whatever. And with most mental unwellness states, you would need someone to, you know, that thing I said about listening in the right way, listening and talking, as well as some medication. And for me, that's why I went into that job, because it's about, I knew I was born to be that listener. I've always felt fairly empathic about people's pain, if you like, you know, walking in their shoes. you know, I was good at the job. You know, that's not an ego thing to say. I was just good at the job. I was good with people because I love people. I love people to be able to enjoy life. And there's nothing worse than feeling either you're the outsider or actually you're so anxious or distressed or you've got OCD or PTSD or whatever that actually your life's shrunk. You kind of stuck away somewhere in a dark room. So again, it's about that Quaker thing of finding the light, and that's around about the time that became a Quaker as well, actually. So it's about helping people without looking down on them. There's always a power in play in a lot of relationships. You know, there's this binary thing of, like, you know, white's good, black's bad, left, right, etc. So there's a binary thing. Hopefully, we're trying to get rid of that. We're trying to say, actually, binaries are very damaging. You know, it's not, you know, you're either good or bad or you're left or right. Life, the world, is this whole moving thing of different colours and different people. And I found that helped me in my work in being a therapist, being a clinician. And a lot of people really found that I didn't really do a lot, I just kind of listened, and it really made a big impact. And I did that often in my spare time as well, because I love my job so much. But I had to retire early because of, as I said, all these conditions I've always had, challenges, health challenges, conditions that are kind of a bit rare really. I've always had breathing problems and mobility problems, and always looked, everybody else says, oh, you look really well, and I could poke them in the eyes. I've always felt very unwell, which is another thing. I've always fought against assumptions, that we always go around, don't we, making assumptions about somebody, kind of fill in the gaps a bit, you know, when we write a story about somebody, even if we don't know them. So I think actually what we need to do is let that person emerge, let them talk, and that's what my job was about. I had to retire very early because I got run over 25 years ago. I went to help somebody who was run over in front of me. He was on a crossing and then he was left there bleeding, dying, and the car drove off. And Chris and I just left work at what was Bolton Institute, and I just said to Chris, move the car, I'm just going to go give first aid. So I rolled an older man onto his side, put him in the recovery position, and I'd given him mouth to mouth. And I was just getting up from that when a Volvo estate drove through a red light and physically drove over me and catapulted me in the air and ended up down the road somewhere. And apparently, obviously I don't remember, I was in a very bad way, but I imagined that I was talking to all these people, the nurses, and saying what a brilliant partner I had and how fantastic it was and all that. But actually I was dying. They gave me a blood transfusion because everything on me was broken. Spinal injuries and hips broken, and knees smashed, and my foot was more or less iron, fractured skull, teeth all smashed. And they didn't think I'd live. So I had this massive blood transfusion. And Chris, bless her, I don't know how she coped with that really. And I was in hospital for 3 months on traction, not able to move, not able to do anything. And I remember saying to Chris, leave me, because I don't know if I'll ever walk again. And you know, she just said, I'm not leaving it, I'm not leaving it, you know. And so again, it shows that actually, you know, I'm with this right person that society has given us such a hard time about being together. You know, we've had some terrible things. That as soon as I was able to, again, I thought, I'm going to add LGBT stuff to my little remit of, you know, let's go out there and actually say, you know, it doesn't matter who you are or who you love, does it? It's about the life that you lead, and if you are a caring person, a sharing person, like the Quakers, you know, they say, you know, speak truth to power, you know, don't tell lies, be always loving and kind, be sharing. If you got something, share it. You know, if you've got £2 in your pocket, give one away. Why do you need £2? You know. So from that, being run over enhanced what conditions and disabilities I already had. So they galloped along, and suddenly I found that actually, and most of the time I couldn't breathe and I couldn't walk. So I had to retire early from the job that I loved. But I thought, I'm not going to sit at home. I want to use this brain, all this training that I've done. So I got in touch with the LGBT Foundation in Manchester, who are a charity. They're quite well known now. And I just said to them, you know, I've got these skills. I probably can't do a lot for you really, but anyway, use me if you can. At Manchester hospitals, you know, all the hospitals got together. So there's Manchester North, Manchester General, etc. And they all had this big training event about equality of every kind. And I was asked to go and do the spokesperson bit about my life really, about LGBT stuff. What does it mean to be a bit different? So, and it's funny, but that day, nearly every speaker started with, my mother was Irish. And I started with, my mother was Irish. And she taught me about being, you know, kind of a bit kind, and she was an outsider. So we all started with that thing. So, and it made you think about, actually, I was from a family that, you know, we didn't struggle to have food on the table or anything. My dad had a good job. But it was that thing of, there was an element of being an outsider there. But anyway, apparently it went down such a storm. There was a lot of people outside who were saying, wasn't that woman brilliant who talked about, she started talking about her Irish mother, and then she talked about how it is to be, you know, non-heterosexual in this heteronormative world. Because again, I still hate labels. I hate using that, but it's just, if you're different, if you fall in love with somebody different, you know, you're still treated fairly badly. But it went down really well. So then the foundation kept saying, can we use you for this event? Can we use you for that event? Can we make a film of you to go to Barclays Bank to try and raise money for LGBT, homeless people, older people? So I did lots of things for them, and I was like their go-to woman, if you like. And I suppose I love doing it, not because I like the sound of my own voice, because I think I've got an awful Yorkshire accent. But it was just the fact that if it has an impact, which I was always told afterwards, you could have heard a pin drop, or we raised £50,000 that night or whatever from that thing. I thought, well, I've obviously been given this role to do, so let's crack on and do it. So through my involvement of the Disability Rights Commission, which later was disbanded when they changed the law, and working with a wonderful woman called Diane Keach, who used to teach at Manchester Met University. She was head of disability studies. So I've done lots of stuff with them. So Paul Martin said to me, you know, you've done a lot behind the scenes, and I don't think I'd told him. I don't know how he found out actually, but he said, would you be willing to go down to London every month with us to work on this equality and diversity framework law that every employer has to put in place, certain things to do with disability and equality in its widest sense. And it'll be a lot of work, you know, it's not a paid thing, it's just, would you bring us your voice to the group? And I think the head of the group was, I wanted to say Sir Simon Stevens. It was a Sir somebody like that, who was quite big up in government. So it was a mixed group. We used to meet in one of the government places, just travel down with Paul Martin on the train, or with one of the senior workers at the foundation, Sean Payne. And I'd be in long meetings, and I'd look at stuff. They'd try and come up with ideas about, you know, Sean would, and then I'd put my ideas actually as a person who struggles with X, Y, and Z. That wouldn't work. And we did that for, I think it was 2 years or something like that. We'd meet regularly for this action group, really, to put together the law, to make sure that the law would work adequately for everybody, so that nobody could be pushed to one side or you know, told, actually no, you can't do this or you can't do that. So as good as it could be, I was very proud of the fact that I was part of that equality and diversity framework, the latest law that's out there. Because I just think we need that protection, but we need to also use not the politicians, not the people in power, not the people who you know, they might have a lot of money behind them, or even some professorship. There are brilliant professors out there, but go to the people who have felt it, go to the people who've lived it, go to the people who've been stuck outside that shop and they can't get inside the blooming shop because there's 6 steps to get in, and the person says, I'll bring a dress out for you to look at. I mean, how embarrassing and belittling. You lose your dignity, you know. As a person who is different in some way, you have as many rights and as many needs and desires and wishes as the next person who might be able-bodied, or who might be, you know, in a male-female relationship, or who might be wealthy or whatever. The leveller is that, as Maya Angelou said, there are as many ways as being human as there are human beings, meaning we're all the same really, but we might be slightly different, but we've all got those same needs. And that's what drove me many a month. I'd get on the train feeling so ghastly and unwell. Really, I just wanted to stay in bed all day, but you know, I thought, no, I'm here for a reason. I'd get on the train, I'd go, I'd be in a long meeting. Sometimes I had to make my voice heard when it wasn't being heard. I remember being in one meeting where somebody who was quite high up saying to Paul Martin, well, who's this and what's she doing here? And you know, I just said, well, I'm the voice of the ordinary woman, if you like. I think I was probably I get a bit smarty pants, you know, when somebody tries to do me down, really. Anyway, after that, it was, you know, it was okay. I managed to get my point across. You won't see my name on any document. I mean, Paul Martin, the foundation knows, and the people that have got their main name behind it knows who was on their team, you know, but it's made a difference. We need those protections. You know, we need people to be not looked after, because I think that's a bit patronising. We need people to be given the voice, and I think a lot of times people are robbed of that voice to say, you know, you can't just sack me because you're the head of P&O and you've decided you want to sack me. You know, you've got to be able to say, no, I have a right to this job, I have a right to a living wage, and somebody's there to look after me. There might have been disabled workers on P&O ferries or whatever, and I hope somebody's looking after them, because quite often those people get put to one side. So yeah, so all my life I've been busy, I guess, trying to do things for things that I think matter, that should matter to everybody, but maybe don't. But when I first started to go to the foundation years ago, there was a lad on the desk, on the reception desk, who was just such a lovely lad. He had such a smile, very gentle, and we clicked immediately. It was like we'd known each other for years, and so we became really close friends. He's like a son to me now. He always calls me lovely Mama Rosie. He's another one that calls me Mama Rosie or Mam. And he was saying how when he came out when he was younger, his parents rejected him really for a long time. It's okay now-ish, but it's not, you know, as you would want. And so he was saying, I don't understand people not loving each other. And I said, I didn't understand that either. So I encouraged him from day one, because I could see there was a lad who was so bright and had such a lot to offer, that actually, why wouldn't you want to help somebody? So I gave him all my psychology books. You know, I said, this is you, the way you are with people, you could do this. And my biggest thrill recently was finding out that actually, yes, he's now qualified, he's an IAPT counsellor, he works for the NHS, fantastic, he's got a job in Lancashire working for the NHS, and I'm so thrilled for him that he's got out of, you know, the foundation was a good starting job, but you know, it's not that well paid, and actually he's growing into the world, and that's wonderful to see. That makes you feel so good. You know, if I could have a role in life, I would want to be the mum to the world, really, to say to everybody, come on, I'll take you under my wing and I'll kind of help you out there and help you do things, because there's so many LGBT people who are rejected or cast aside just because of that silly label, because they're non-heterosexual, because they don't fit the norm, whatever the norm is, you know, that they might always struggle to feel that they don't fit into the group, that they don't fancy girls if they're a boy, or You know, they don't want to wear the right gendered clothing. What on earth is right gendered clothing? You know, it's all a social construct, isn't it really? We're just people. Let's just be people. And that was one of my big missions always, from being tiny. Just be people. Just be loving, kind people. So I worked a long time, I still do I guess, for the LGBT Foundation as this health champion, to say, look at how you treat people, especially in healthcare services. Look at how you approach people, look at how you speak to people. Are you being misgendering, or are you being exclusive? When actually what we should have is an equitable world where we're trying to encourage people to feel safe, feel comfortable, and to trust each other. And that's a big ask, isn't it? But we can all do it by just saying, how would I feel if? How would I feel if I was that person walking in those shoes and feeling that pain and feeling outside? So for ones like Gareth, you know, who I love dearly, and Andrew and all the other young people I've met in that journey, that actually I think we should just look to each other and say, you know, as a person, you're lovely. As a person, you're worth investing in. As a person, you're worth encouraging to go on to be as much as you can be, to be as big a person as you can be, because it's a bit like throwing a pebble in a pond. It's a ripple, isn't it? If I help that person, they're going to then go on and say, you know what, I can help another person. That happened to me when I was little. I remember one of the school teachers, I really remember, Mrs. Elton. So she helped me, as well as the neighbour, Mrs. McIntosh, and she helped me to be a better person. So I want to help other people to be better persons. And I guess being LGBT myself was the reason maybe for going and saying, look, I've retired from the NHS, I'm no longer able to work in a full-time job for the NHS because I'm too poorly, but I've still got a brain, and I've still got a mouth. I mean, nobody's put a zip on it to shut that up, so I can still give lectures. So I volunteered for them for a long, long time in a very, very active role, you know, giving lectures to, I think it was 400 people for the NHS, for the Manchester General Hospital Organisation, about what's it like to walk in these shoes, what's it like to feel othered, because you can feel othered. I mean, I felt as a patient, I've been othered by nurses and doctors when I've been at my most vulnerable, when actually I've wanted them to be the most caring, the most focused on me and my health, me and my needs, not me and my who I love or me and who I live with, but me and what I need. And I think generally in life that's maybe what we should all do, look at, you know, what do we need for each other, not, well, who are you assigned to, or, you know, who do you vote for? If we can put that to one side and say, let's be kind and let's share, actually it makes the world just tick over a little better, really. It takes off a lot of pressure. And in this day and age there's so many people with mental health problems who are saying, you know, I suffer from anxiety, I suffer from feeling outside of things. And I think that was what led me on to my other, I don't want to say the word work because it's not really work, helping or working alongside with, being alongside with refugees. Because I've always felt, I suppose from having a mum who was from Southern Ireland, she always felt othered. She always felt she wasn't quite right and she didn't fit in. When I was a little girl, she used to say to me, don't tell people we're Irish, like it was some kind of bad thing, because she was frightened. She was frightened of some kind of backlash, because we lived in East Yorkshire and it was a very insular place. Everybody looked the same, everybody spoke the same, went to the same churches, but she was from Southern Ireland, Catholic, which was a bit unusual in the area that I lived in. And I think she'd had a really hard time. I know she had a hard time when she was little, but she had a hard time living here in a country that's supposed to be, even then in the 1960s, whatever, very caring, very inclusive. So I was always aware of what it was like to be othered. So maybe I wouldn't put the term refugee onto my mum, but she was an other person. She was an alien. You know, that's maybe the word that we should think about using, aliens. So when people come here because they are fleeing from starvation, war, abuse, being mistreated or tortured, why wouldn't you want to come to another country that offered you refuge? You know, why wouldn't you want to seek help and hold out your hand? And why wouldn't we, as people who are secure here and we have everything we need, why wouldn't we reach out our hand to say, I'll pull you out of that, I'll help you, I won't let you go under, I'm there for you. And that's what I've always tried to do. I mean, not in a huge way, I'm not a Wonder Woman or anything like that, I'm very ordinary, but if there was anybody ever to help, I would do that. So one of my, I suppose, earliest things was to help to join the sewing group. They had a group called the Sewing Sisters in Bolton, and it was for women who just arrived. A lot of them, they couldn't sew or they didn't have materials. They wanted to make garments for themselves and their children. So my sewing is actually pretty rubbish, really. I mean, you won't want me to sew your buttons on. But what I could do is I could go along to help to just be there as a presence. I would iron garments for them, but then I thought, oh, actually I could teach bits of English because I used to teach. So I'd set up a big board and I used to do drawings for the children because there's some children running around, and I'd do the English bits as well. And most weeks I'd take along a big bag of just all kinds of things really. There might have been bars of chocolate or shampoo, women's sanitary items, scarves, because I know they like scarves, shoes, little toys for the children, anything really that I thought, well, that might be of interest. So I'd haul this huge bag in, I'd put it in the middle, and I'd just leave them to it. Excuse me. And it was interesting that a lot of the women, because if you've been through hell and you've been through war, you become actually a bit of a fighter yourself. So all of these women were fighting each other. They were kind of pushing each other out the way. You know, they needed to get that bag of bits. And they would select like the pair of shoes they wanted, or maybe the shampoo they wanted, or the chocolate or whatever. And there was one little woman in the corner who was always very quiet. She was just sat with the sewing machine. She was very good as a seamstress, and she was teaching other people how to do things, but very, very quiet. And she used to look. She'd look up very, very suddenly and maybe catch your eye, and I'd smile at her or I'd wink, and she'd sort of smell that churn. And at the end, when everybody had finished and there was chaos and rubbish everywhere, she'd go and just pick up one or two little items that were left. You know, it might be a shampoo, or it might be some soap, or it might have been, you know, a bag of sweets, something. She'd take little bits and then she'd just say, thank you, Mama. And she'd give me that look and she'd go. And that person has become a very, very close personal friend. She calls me Mum, she calls me Mama Rosie. So she's another one I've kind of adopted really. So she had been through hell. She came as the war in Syria started. She had a very difficult time with an abusive marriage. And you know, it's been a really difficult time for her to convey to other people what it's like to be a refugee. I mean, I think the words themselves, refugee and asylum seeker, have become like swear words. They become dirty words that people throw around, and we should forget those and say, there's that person that was escaping persecution. There's that person that needed help. Not there's that refugee or there's that asylum seeker. Because we all seek something, and what they seek is care and compassion. And it's great that actually she found something. I don't know what it was in me, but she suddenly felt she could trust me, she could relax with me. She didn't with anybody else. And she'd follow me around like this little lamb figure who felt really bonded to me. And you know, so she's family now, so she comes every week and she'll come for a coffee, and she'll text or she'll ring up, she'll say, how's Mama Rosie? You know, she gets very upset if I'm not well. So I mean, that was one of the things I did. I also used to go along to the centre of Bolton and help with some other refugee groups to help them sort out things. Like there was a boys football group which I'd send boys along to, So I knew that some of the social workers that I'd done some training with years ago were running that, and so it was not a big thing. I don't know why I'm even talking about it really. It's not a huge thing. It's just something that I just think that we should all do. There's something that everybody can make a difference with somebody else's life. It doesn't matter what religion they are, what country they've come from. We've got this shared thing called being human, and if we can help that person, then why don't you? Just reach out and do it. And from doing that, actually, because I listen to Cammy talk every day about this huge sadness, this real heart-rending sadness about leaving home. She'd tell me about Syria, about how she used to live in an area, I think the nearest large place was Aleppo, but she said we lived in an area which was not too far from the sea. But she said we lived in an area where on one side we had Jewish neighbours and on the other side we had Christian neighbours. And she said, and everybody came together because we were all friends, we were all a community. So if there was a wedding, whether it was a Jewish one or a Muslim one or a Christian one, then we would all share. So we'd make the food together and we'd do the dancing together and the party together. If somebody was sick, they looked after each other. She said that we used to sleep out, we'd roll out our bed mats under the warm evening sky and we'd sleep, She said, and everybody shared. So she said it wasn't the country that people think of here that we were against each other, because she said it really was a sharing, caring country. It was lovely, she said. And she talked about the flowers and the smells, and I remember her talking particularly about things like the heavy smell of the roses used to make her feel quite sleepy, or the sunflowers. She talked about the sunflowers being like big beaming smiles, and she and the other children would go and look at these sunflowers and talk about sunflowers. And so from talking to Cammy, because I'd always been a writer, I suddenly thought I wanted to get her message out there about, look at this woman, listen to this woman. So I made a short film called Woman of Syria, which when they had a refugee event, which was run by a magnificent woman in Bolton, who does all the refugee work on a Wednesday, and so she'd said to me, Rosie, would you come along to this food event we're having for the refugees and show your film or read one of your poems, because I'd written a lot of poems about refugees. So we did that. So we showed the film that we'd written really, which was, I suppose it was Cammy's story about coming here, about how sad she felt, but how happy she felt to have found something which feels a little bit safe. It's getting a little bit safer each day. Maybe it will never feel fully safe, but I'm so pleased that we were able to make her feel a little bit safe. So if you want to watch that, or I do make other films, so they're all there on YouTube somewhere. So that's called A Woman of Syria. And from that I decided, actually, I'm a writer, I've got skills, I've got time now, I'm not able to do a lot, so I'll make films. So the films were like all my work I did, which was about people, which was about equality, or trying to make equitable voices, because I think if you rob somebody of their voice, you've robbed them of a life. So to give these people a voice, I wrote their stories in an indirect way. So for instance, I wrote one called Our Linda, which was based a little bit on my own family history. So part of my family were from a mining area in Doncaster, and what they went through during the miners' strike, and how that split communities apart. It really was like a knife through the centre of a really well-rounded, well-baked, well-meshed cake. Suddenly it was split into crumbs by Margaret Thatcher's evil ways of looking at actually how can we split up unions and communities. So I wrote this little film called Our Linda, and I'm so pleased with it because it started out really as a monologue, me writing the story of the woman in the hospital who's dying, and she's talking about her family, about her mining family. So she talks about her husband, who's a very ordinary guy, there's lots of ordinary guys out there, and her sons, and then talking about her daughter Linda, our Linda, you know, how I love our Linda E, she's just like me, our Linda. And then it was filmed, and I was so pleased with actually on film. I think it has more impact than just listening to the monologue. And it's about people. The story is, never judge a book by its cover. And we should all be very caring and compassionate about everyone. Never make assumptions, you know, because we all make assumptions, don't we, about how something should be. And suddenly, you know, you see the reality of it, it's a bit of a shock, and you think, oh my God, I didn't expect that, did I? So again, that's on this long list of films. I think I've got 11 films now. So I've tried to cover all the areas of injustice or minority groups that if I'd still been fit, I would have kept on going all my life to go and stand on a picket line or go and write a book or go and stand up and speak to 100 people about things. So I've looked at things like what was it like coming out as a lesbian in the 80s? I've no idea because that wasn't my story, but I looked at that because that was based on the true story of a young woman in Bolton. Our Linda was based on the family thing of, you know, being a minor, being adopted, being mixed race. You know, what's that like to feel straddled between two communities? Four wheels are better than two was based on the idea that actually there's no such thing as the traditional family or what's normal. I keep saying there's no such thing as normal. So this film was actually about what's it like to be married when actually somebody can love somebody of either gender, and they might do, and they might have a disabled child. So what's it like for the child in the middle of this family group? And I think again it sort of pulls together because it makes you question, what were my thoughts on that? Do I think that's wrong? Do I think that's unacceptable? Does it seem to work? Yes, it seems to work, you know. So if my films make people think in a more open or different way, then I think job done for me. It's not about me, it's not an ego thing about, oh look at me, I'm a writer, or look at me, I'm a director. Because I think they're sort of inconsequential, they're asides really. For me the focus is the story. The story is about equality, the story is about diversity, and looking at actually, can I make people think? And if people watch my films and I make them think, then that's brilliant, that's just brilliant, that's a job well done for me. And I think that's my view on life really, just listen to each other, be open. I've always been open from being tiny, like I think I said before. I've looked at people, I've sort of weighed them up a bit and thought, you know, he stood on the corner of the room, everybody else is over there, and why is he on his own? And I thought actually, if I can make a difference by wandering over and saying, hey up, how you doing? Then I'll do that, you know. But if I think actually he's comfortable on his own, he's found his corner, then I'll leave it be. And I don't know why, I've always intuitively been able to assess people or assess what the situation is, and maybe that's why I went to work in psychology and teaching in universities, and then writing and editing, because all those things are about people. They're about looking at people's stories, because we're all a story, you know, we're all kind of a book waiting to be read. So if I'm reading somebody and I'm reading them right, you know, that's great. I can open up the pages, I can open up their lives, can't I, by turning a page and saying, look at that, somebody else should read that book, somebody else should get involved in that. So that's why I've, I suppose, been a bit more inquiring about things that look like they're set or they're not. Oh, don't leave that, they've always done that. And I might think, well, why have they always done that? You know, maybe they want to do it differently. Maybe they want somebody to challenge them a bit or take them a cup of tea or whatever. I used to do hospital visiting when I was a youngster. Again, not because I particularly like going to hospitals, but I used to think there must be loads of people in hospital that have got no family to visit them, they've got no friends to visit them, because I was thinking about the old lady sat on the wall who'd had the stroke. So I did that for a number of years. I just toddled along. I volunteered, I don't know why they took me on, but I volunteered. I used to toddle along there once a week, I don't think my mother ever knew where I was going actually. I used to just say, I'll be back in a couple of hours. But I enjoyed it because I met some amazing characters and they enjoyed me nattering to them, you know, or if they didn't speak up anyway. So I think there's always a reason to do these things that we do. You know, if you've got a tiny skill, whether it's you've got the best smile in the world, and you might have, you know, go and share it. Don't keep it to yourself. You know, go and share it out there. You know, as you pass somebody in the street, give them a smile. It costs you now, does it? It might make somebody's day. You might be sat there next to a lonely man who lived on his own, sat in the bus shelter, but if you flash him a smile and say it's a lovely day, innit, you might have made that man's day. So I've always done things really not wanting to be in view, which is a bit odd really, because, you know, I mean, I suppose if you're listening to me now you might think, oh, a bit of an ego likes me in front of the camera, but I don't actually. I was always quite shy as a little, and a little bit reticent now to be involved in lots of things. The reason why I get involved is my heart goes out to people. So if things come along as a consequence of me helping others, it's always A, a bit of a shock or a surprise, or B, something that I wouldn't have wanted or sought for myself. Like the time I won the award from Sir Ian McKellen, I've been doing all this work for the LGBT Foundation, and I've set up this thing called Pride in Practice, which is about training all GPs in how to talk to anybody who's LGBT, how to do it appropriately, sensitively, how to set up special clinics for them. I actually fought to get a mental health team specialist installed in Bolton for those from the LGBT community, because they didn't have anybody, and they said, oh, they're no different to anybody else. So I went to every meeting I could, and I stood up in meetings and actually barracked the CCG about it. It was pretty awful really, but in the end they gave in and I got it. But then one day from the LGBT Foundation, a friend called Andrew, who was one of the managers there, said, oh Rosie, we're having this event, it's at the town hall, are you going to come? And I said, no, I'm not. And he said, oh, well, why are you not coming? I said, no, I said, I can't stand things like that, I don't like getting dressed up. And he said, oh no, you must come, I want you to come. And I said, well, I'm not coming. So we had this bit of an argument about was I coming, wasn't I coming. In the end, he said, oh please, come for me, because I've got nobody to sit with on my table. So he knew the spot of Rosie he could get to, you see, and that was, oh, all right, if Andrew, oh, well, I wouldn't want Andrew to be sat on his own, that'd be awful. So anyway, I went along and he said, oh, would you wear a dress or something that's glitzy for you, you know, like a special pair of dungarees or something? Because he said, it is at the town hall. He said, and like there's a meal on or something like that. He said, and bring your Chris and all this. So I said, oh, all right then. So anyway, I loathed to go, but what I did was I thought, all right then, I'll go. So I wore what was my wedding outfit, which I'll tell you about in a minute. So we got there to this big event at the town hall, and I thought, oh, this is a bit glitzy for just an end of year thing for the foundation, isn't it? And then suddenly it was, oh, this is awards night for people that made a lifetime change to the LGBT community. And I thought, oh, what's all this about? And then suddenly there's Ian McKellen, Sir Ian McKellen, on the stage in front of us saying, you know, and this person has made so many changes for so many people's lives. And so the Lifetime Award goes to Rosie Adamson Clark. And you know, when you have one of those weird cartoon moments where I'm looking around and I'm thinking, who did he just say? Is she sat there or something? And then I'm looking, and then Andrew goes like that to me, and I'm like, oh me. And then so suddenly I'm on the stage with Sir Ian McKellen getting this beautiful glass, like blue glass and a plain glass etched thing to say, I've had the award for outstanding work for lifetime work towards equality for the LGBT family, really. So I think that was lovely. I got to chat to him a lot, which was a really nice thing. But as I just said, the reason why I was wearing my lovely wedding outfit was my wife and I, Chris, we've been together 28 years, and it's been beautiful. It's a beautiful relationship. I love her to bits. She is the most wonderful person I cannot be the person I am or do the things I've done without my Chris. She's the one that's the motor. I'm just the person who does. She's the person that she helps me to do all these things. But we'd had a civil partnership ceremony at the Lowry Theatre in 2008. And then the government decided that yes, us LGBT oddbods could be married. And you could be married in your house of religion if your religion allowed it. Well, Quakers have been campaigning for 50 years to get equal marriage. They've always had an advisor to government, and they've always believed, since George Fox started the Quakers in 1662, that gender is irrelevant, that actually marriage should be about two people who come together, who love each other, respect each other, and have the same values, because being a Quaker is all about our values. And so they were instrumental in making the law to have equal marriage. I hate it when people say same-sex marriage, because it's not. It's equal marriage. It's equal to everybody else, that's all. So we were the first Quakers in the country to have our equal marriage in our meeting house of worship in Bolton, which was absolutely wonderful. It was such a special occasion. And Friends House, which is our big place in London, had decided would we have the Guardian or a big newspaper do a big story on it, because it was just something so special. They sent down their head of government policy to be with us on the day, but we decided it was a private thing, it was our private marriage, and we just wanted to have our Quaker friends with us and a handful of friends, which made it more special. So it wasn't in the papers, it wasn't anywhere else, but it's there in the history books, and it's there in the Quaker Meeting House archives if you look for it. So we are in the history books, and I just felt so pleased to be the first to be with my wonderful wife and to wear the outfit to get my award from Sir Ian McKellen. I became a Quaker probably 15 years ago, and it was like falling in love with Chris. It was like coming home. It was so easy. It was like just coming home, because being a Quaker is everything I've always been. It's about being equal, fighting for people's rights, being always truthful. Speak truth to power is a Quaker saying, and always sharing, having love and kindness. And I think Chris and I, being Quakers, is just a natural progression of part of our journey together, and our journey as promoters of human rights, because Chris is as much a fighter and campaigner as I am. She just does it quietly and has always done it behind the scenes as a union rep as well. You know, that's how we came to be Quakers, because it's part of who we are.